Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back into the studio for more on the third scale maquette of Kronos. This is going to be the 13th episode on the final maquette in the puzzle that has been this piece/project so far. Let's get into it. Today we are going to be bringing this, or rather the female figure here, from rough blocking to a more refined surface. We obviously haven't actually finished our blocking entirely yet of this female figure. However, I find that changing tempo, changing up how I work from time to time, really helped me get through a long project and helps me finish the sculpture. We'll get back to this and my thoughts on it a little bit later on in the video. I use a mixture of techniques to unify the surface. There's no one size fits all, and it entirely depends on how well the blocking was done to begin with. If the blocking was good, then the refining goes a lot faster. A lot of people call this stage modeling, but I'm not entirely sure what that term is supposed to mean exactly. Things often blend together and the steps are not as clear as you would perhaps like to think. I would personally like the steps to be as linear as possible, however, and if I managed to be 100% successful with the block-in, that would potentially be the case. But no one is ever 100% successful with their block-in, it seems, so there's always a little back and forth here. Having said all that, unifying the surface does allow me to see what the block-in is going to become, what the block-in actually is, and it helps me determine where I need to make changes in order to improve the work. The techniques you'll witness here today can be summed up into two main techniques. As you go over a piece and refine it, I usually use both. You're going to see me rake the surface lightly with a rake tool, and you're going to see me add small amounts of clay with a wood tool. These two techniques are in opposition to each other, and I find that when executed together in the appropriate spot, I get the best results. There are, however, things to watch out for and pay attention to while doing this. The rake tool is one of those tools that often gets a lot of hate in the circles that I run in, and I think that hatred is misplaced personally. It all comes down to the usage of any tool. Essentially, you determine whether a technique or a tool works or not. The dangers associated with the rake tool is removal of too much clay, which flattens out your sculpture. And of course, this is a real concern, but there are a few ways to combat it. One of the ways to combat it is to use a light touch. We're looking to barely scratch the surface, not remove large amounts of clay, large amounts of volume here. Moving the rake tool in circles or half-moon shapes and constantly changing the direction of these really help eliminate flat spots as well. Instead, the result becomes a nicely rounded surface. Another problem with the rake tool is that it makes things look nice. Therefore, I think it has gotten a bad reputation of being overused and used over the top of a poorly executed block-in. In my opinion, if the block-in is done well and is ready for it, the rake tool performs a good job at cleaning up the surface. If applied thoughtfully, it can also be used to redefine the shapes established during the block-in, essentially improve your shape design. As you can see, I use the rake tool quite actively in this phase to sharpen up my contours as well, making sure they are crisp and clean, like a sharp pencil line drawn by a steady and confident hand. A good block-in is key, however, to the refining stage going according to plan. There are a few things that I've done that have ensured that I have a successful block-in. Number one is shape design. Good shape design is important if we want a good sculpture. Number two is leaving a bit of space between the shapes themselves so that I can now create a transition between them. I can this way easily control the depth of my transition. This brings me to the second major technique that I'll use here today. And that is the drag and roll. The drag and roll is a drag and a roll with the wooden modeling tool, with a bit of clay at the end of it. I use this technique to fill in gaps between my forms. This creates the transition essentially. I also use it to add volume to my forms wherever it is appropriate. This helps me combat the flattening that the use of the rake tool can cause and does cause. A good tip for successfully navigating through the refining of the surface is to rarely let the rake tool have the final say. Let the addition of clay using the drag and roll technique with the wooden modeling tool do that. It gives the surface a really nice bouncy texture that looks very fresh and very alive. The surface of your clay can reflect light in a similar fashion to skin if this drag and roll technique is performed well. On to the second chapter, in this video, where I block in the leg. The refining of the body is going well at this point, and I'm confident that I'm on the right path. I'm confident that my blocking is working. Therefore, I want to block in the leg now, before bringing this whole thing together. Because the proportions of the torso are already established, I'll use those to determine the length of my leg. I know that a leg from the crotch down is about the same length as from the crotch to the top of the head. As you might have noticed, however, there is no head here, but I can imagine where a head would be and determine the length of my leg this way. I know I'd rather want the legs to appear long compared to appearing short, so I err on the side of making them perhaps just a touch too long. Once I more or less have an idea for the length of the entire leg, I can make a decision on where to place the knee. I know that a general rule of thumb is that from the crotch down to the bottom of the kneecap is about the same length as the bottom of the kneecap to the bottom of the foot. Knowing the bottom of the foot and the crotch already allows me then to place the knee. Keep in mind that these are of course rough estimates and generalized proportions. They are not specific to one person, and you'll find when working from life or even from photographs that some of these proportions are not going to work. There's going to be quite a bit of variation. Because I'm not working from life on this little sculpture and with limited reference, I have to use some rough proportional rules in order to guide me. Once I place my bony landmarks in the case of the leg, that's the ankle and the knee, in height, which means where do I place them up and down, once I've done that, I have my lengths decided upon. With these established, I can move on to determining what direction I want these bony landmarks to face. I give them direction, essentially. It's obviously somewhat limited by the range of motion we humans are capable of, and I try to stick to something that's relatively believable. Once I've decided upon that, I can move on to contours and placing internal information. I like to have a beginning and an end when building contours. And having the direction of the structures established as well helps ensure that the contours and the internal information reach to where they need to reach in order for them to look and function as humans look and function. I am relying on my knowledge of anatomy when doing this, of course. Where does a muscle start? Where does it end? And doing it this way gives me immense freedom to design, to do what I want, essentially. Usually, on a normal day, I'll work in a 3-hour block. This is mostly because of the models, they can't work forever, but even here, where there is no model, I tend to like working in a 3-hour block. I guess it's become a bit of a habit, and it fits nicely into my day. I can fit 2 3-hour blocks into a day with an hour lunch, and then some editing at the end of the day after I come home. After hours of concentration on sculpture, I do get tired of looking and thinking, tired of problem solving so actively. So at the end, usually the last 25-minute session of a 3-hour block of work, I like to reward myself doing something that I enjoy doing. It's still work, but it's for me, not necessarily for the sculpture or what the sculpture needs. It's what I need at this point. Usually, for me, that means modeling forms, because that's what I enjoy. Or if you want to be real crude about it, and perhaps a little bit more honest, making the sculpture look nice is something that I like to do. I like tightly rendered, clean-looking work. And so here at the end of the day, I enjoy myself a little bit with some more modeling and refining. And luckily for me, it's kind of what needs to happen to this piece anyway. Changing up what I'm working on and how I'm working really helps keep me sane during what can at times be a pretty slow-moving task. I started the day out modeling forms, and the improvement, the progress, feel really slow, and it feels like the figure is kind of stalling out. By changing it up and starting to block in the leg, I get to feel the rush of improving the work and moving forwards again at a fast pace. But it does take a lot of energy, as there are many more things to consider during the blocking phase of the sculpture. Big things that, if done poorly, sabotages the entire project. I want you to keep in mind while watching these videos that my process is tailored to me by me. I know myself well enough by this point and make sure that the process is enjoyable for me. Still though, even though I'm working on something that I enjoy, I need to keep certain things in mind while enjoying myself. The thing that is on the front of my mind when doing this, rendering the surface, is do not ruin the good work you've already done to the sculpture. Now let me explain that a little bit further. You can take pretty much anyone, and with a little bit of training, a couple of weeks perhaps, they can make a nice contour. Then you ask them to make sure that contour moves well in space and the entire thing falls apart really quickly. It's very hard to transition between stages of sculpture and to be able to hold on to the good work done in the previous stage. Personally, I like to attempt to work in a fairly linear fashion, essentially step by step. This means that the previously done work must be good, and then it must be respected and held on to when I move on to the next step. While modeling, there are two things I keep in mind. One is making sure that I don't compromise my structure with my modeling. The other is maintaining or actively improving the shape design. What I mean by structure is essentially bones, the integrity of the bones and the connection between the bony masses. I don't want to model forms that push my spine from where I've placed it, giving me a sculpture with potentially scoliosis. I don't want to model one side of the ribcage out of symmetry with the other side. I don't want to model forms so that the muscles become strangely asymmetrical in appearance. I don't want to model one rib so that it starts sitting higher up than the same rib on the other side of the body. I don't want to model the bottom of the ribcage up or down. That's a lot of don'ts and do not do's, but it's important to mention. If you do the blocking well, you don't have to worry about a lot of the issues I mentioned above. You don't have to worry about your figure having an asymmetrical ribcage or a spine that's suffering from scoliosis. Those issues will already be solved. So now, as long as you respect the decisions that you made previously, you can model around them. And that's what respecting your structure and holding on to your structure means. We'll talk more about what it means to maintain and actively improve the shape design in a future video on this project. For now, however, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, consider liking it and subscribing to the channel for more videos. I put out a new video every Thursday, so stay tuned for next week. If you want to support the channel, visit the link to my Patreon page in the description below the video to learn how. Until then, stay creative, and I hope to see you in the next one.